I'm Steven Singer. I'm here in my kitchen. In front of me, a lot of tools and ingredients I have for making pizza. I'm here on my property in West Sonoma County in Sebastopol, where we grow Syrah and Viognier grapes and olive oil. And we're going to make pizza. And I'm going to share with you some of what I've learned over the 35 years that I've been making pizza. So let's get started on the dough. What we begin with is what we call a sponge. And it's an initial state of the mixing of the dough and fermentation. So it includes 2 teaspoons of yeast, and I happen to know that one of these packets of yeast is exactly 2 teaspoons. So we go ahead and pour that in a big bowl. And it is of note that I make our dough by hand because I like the way in which you connect with the feel, and it's certainly not too hard or too much exertion to make the dough as opposed to using a mechanical mixer. So we have 2 teaspoons of yeast and 3/4 of a cup of warm water. So we pour that in and do our best to get that kind of dissolved in the warm water. Wooden spoon is what we use to try to agitate the water. And then next we add a 1/4 cup each of rye flour, organic rye flour. And the same amount, 1/4 cup of unbleached white. Sometimes I experiment with other kinds of flour, but I've actually found that unbleached white is the best and most reliable dough flour for the kind of crackerly, flavorful crust that we're trying to produce. So you get that really nicely blended in, and here's the first period of waiting. You need to, once this is nicely blended, let it sit for about 30 minutes to where you really get the yeast activated and it starts to bubble. And that is called making a sponge. So now that the sponge has developed, it's time to introduce the dry ingredients, which includes 3¼ cups of unbleached white flour with a teaspoon of salt. And that goes here together into the sponge with our wet ingredients, which includes 3/4 cup of cold water, a 1/4 cup of extra virgin olive oil, and as a little bit of feeding for the fermenting dough, we like to add about a tablespoon of honey. So here it goes. Just kind of bringing them in part. So the first half of that dry goods in here. About half of the liquid. We do the gross mixing here in the bowl, and that's all in anticipation ultimately of getting our hands on it, which is a true handmade dough that we've got going here. Here's the rest of the flour and salt mixture, and the rest of our liquid. Obviously trying to keep the dough from flying everywhere, so not being too vigorous until we've got a good mixed situation here. And this calls rather quickly for getting our hands into it. And for me, that's the whole point of this. So this is the part where you get your hands into it and really start getting a feel for the level of moisture and just the cohesion of the dough. And being a hands-on person, I particularly enjoy the sensation of feeling the dough kind of coming together. And you don't want to work it too hard, but you want to make sure that you get it really properly incorporated and even. So that just takes a little while, and the more often you make the dough and you feel what it feels like once it's proofed, the more you understand what these intermediate stages kind of amount to. So getting all that pretty much mixed in, I then like to take it and work it on top of this butcher block surface. And so you see it's actually really ends up incorporating pretty well, and those proportions seem pretty reliably good. You want a dough that's not too sticky. If it is too sticky, you can add a little more flour, but you really just want it to feel moist and pliable and well integrated. And once it achieves that, it's time to stop working it and put it back in the bowl and let it begin rising. So finding a warm spot to put it into. Once you've back in the dough is back into the bowl and covered, we now let it rest for a couple of hours. So this is the dough that came out of what we produced earlier. It proofed overnight, and then we divided that ball of dough after the punch downs and the overnight proofing in a cold environment into 4 or 5 different balls, and this is one of those balls. So given that we've been filming this, it's a little bit dry, but it's pretty forgiving here. It's just working it until we feel like we've gotten it to a place that we can get the thin level of thickness, or the level of thickness that we want, and that includes just working with it, including even throwing it. So we're going to make our first pizza, and we've got quite a few different ingredients here because I think the sky's the limit when you want to make pizza. Obviously, I love certain traditional pizzas like a sausage pizza or various other more traditional things, but we like to experiment, and developing all these kind of features of our palate is what you see in these ingredients that we have here. So the pizza we're going to make first, and we're going to, by the way, start, now that we've got the dough rolled out, putting a little cornmeal on the paddle so that it slides off easily. And now place the dough back on there. And I think a lot about making pizza as building flavor. So we kind of work from the dough up in terms of really developing some depth and complexity, even in a pizza. So what we have that we're putting on the dough first is a garlic oil, mincing a bunch of fresh garlic and infusing olive oil with that. The kind of olive oil we have, of course, is the Baker Lane olive oil from Singer Baker Lane Estate. Here's a little bit of salt. Salt always is a great activator, and putting it down on the base kind of really integrates it in with the pizza. Then we're going to put a layer of something that I prepared yesterday, which is an onion confit, which is basically onion cooked in its own juices, including some sweet wine, vinegar, salt, pepper, and thyme and pepper, and just cooking them very slowly and really deepening the richness of the onion flavor, sweetening them, and giving us a really strong base of flavor. And the pizza that we're making is actually kind of a variation on an Alsatian dish called tarte flambée, which is usually onions like this, a little bit of pancetta or bacon, and what we like to include is a triple creme cheese, blue cheese, well-known cheese from that area of the world that is a blue cheese that comes like this, and then rather than break it, grate it, it's too soft to do that. We just sort of create little chunks of it, and that will certainly melt and spread once it gets into the oven. Trust me, this is a crowd pleaser. So that's spread out evenly. I'm going to do a little innovation that I've never done before, which is have a little grated Comté cheese on this, which is another French cheese that adds a lot of richness and nuttiness. A little bacon on top so it can benefit from the heat that's in the oven and the top by being on top and cooking. And as you can see, I like to make a pretty generous pizza. Pizza's big flavor. And lastly, a crack of pepper. Now, one other tip in trying to get your pizza off of the paddle and where it needs to go into the floor of the oven, I lift the pizza up close to my mouth and I blow so that I know that it's going to move free. Sometimes you have to move it around. There we go. That's gonna be a good pie.